4th be with you all. It's a very happy day in the Star Wars community when we celebrate all of these great movies. A fun fact about today in the Catholic Church is today is the vigil of the Ascension of the Lord. Now, the congruence of these calendars, the May the 4th being the day before the Ascension of the Lord, will not happen again for at least another 150 years. So it's a very great year for Star Wars and Catholicism. So, in that vein, I am going to give you an episode of Jesus and the Jedi about the Ascension, and specifically about the role that the body plays in the afterlife of both the faith and Star Wars. Now, it may seem as though there's not a lot of connection between Star Wars and the Ascension. It actually may seem as though there are parts that Star Wars is, in fact, dualistic, where it's body against the spirit. You think, especially Yoda's statement that we are luminous beings. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. Well, I'm going to take it from the perspective of what happens after. There's going to be a lot of spoilers in this. And if you don't know your Christianity and you don't know your Star Wars, all of it will be spoiled for you today. So, be aware. I'm going to focus on the part after Qui-Gon Jinn has imparted to Yoda and Obi-Wan what Yoda calls the secret of immortality. Now, what's particularly striking about this, for our purposes, the relationship of the body and the spirit in the afterlife, is how Obi-Wan and Yoda die. It's especially striking in episode 4. Obi-Wan is the first Jedi that we see die in the cinematographical order, in the theatrical release order. But in canon, we see that when Jedi have died, even Qui-Gon Jinn, in the prequels, earlier chronologically, they die like everybody else. Their body's there, they are died by their injuries, but their body's still there, and, in cases, sometimes the body is burned, or done whatever is proper funeral rites. What's so intriguing about the way that Obi-Wan dies in the Death Star is that his body disappears. His lightsaber's left, but his body is gone. The same thing with Yoda we see later. When he dies, he fades away. His body goes with him. And that's what I want to focus on. In being one with the Force, in this special way that the Jedi can be, that Obi-Wan and Yoda can be in order to continue their life in the Force. They are taken up, body and soul, to the Force. Which is exactly what happens to Jesus after his resurrection. He spends 40 days with his apostles, teaching other people. Paul says that he appeared not only to the 12, but also to 500 other Christians. And after that time, he was seen body and soul ascending into heaven. Now, the apostles at this point are very awestruck about this. But St. Paul makes the point that this ascension into heaven, again, body and soul, is the first fruits of our redemption. When we're baptized into Christ. We become a part of this mystical body, just as the Jedi are a mystical part of the Force, as you will. We, by baptism, are baptized into Christ. So we are a part of him, as it were, spiritually speaking. But this spiritual aspect is a real aspect. So what happens to Christ will also happen to us. Jesus Christ rose from the dead in body and spirit. Not just spiritually, not just an afterlife of other sorts of religions, but body and soul. And so, when We die if we die in Christ. There will be a resurrection of the dead, as we'll talk about later in this program. But with this connection to Christ, we see what he has done, and we will follow him. So, as Obi-Wan and Yoda die, there's also this aspect of body and soul, the unity of these beings being integrated into the Force. So, as Christ is the first fruits, we see that playing out in Obi-Wan and Yoda. We also see this in the faith in a very striking manner in the assumption of Mary, body and soul, into heaven at her death. Not a post-death resurrection there, but being taken up body and soul at death, which is exactly what happens to Obi-Wan and Yoda. Okay, the second aspect here, somebody might come up with, well, what about the Force ghost business? It doesn't seem like Obi-Wan and Yoda have their physical bodies if they're appearing to us in just this Force ghost matter. But that's not really an objection, because as we see in the faith, Jesus appeared to Paul in a mystical manner. Not physically, because the other companions of Paul, when he was struck blind, didn't see Jesus. But Paul did. And this goes to show many, many different apparitions of especially Our Lady, especially Mary, throughout the centuries. Not appearing bodily and physically, because Mary, especially, her body is in heaven. But there is this appearance, this real appearance, but not bodily, in a mystical way. So the appearance of Obi-Wan, especially to Luke, is in this sort of mode. It doesn't exclude the resurrection of the body. Especially we can see this parallel with Paul and Jesus appearing to Paul and Obi-Wan appearing to Luke, is when Luke sees Obi-Wan's Force Ghost for the first time in Hoth, and Han rides right through it. Han doesn't see Obi-Wan there. So at first we see the connection, the resurrection of the body, and then we see this Force Ghost, this mystical appearance in the faith as well. For this last section, talking about the resurrection of the body, there's a creed, a set of beliefs that all Christians profess. And it ends with, I believe in the resurrection of the body, the resurrection of the dead. Now, again, what I said before, what Jesus did at the beginning will happen for us. Now, when we die, death theologically is the separation of the soul from the body. Okay? But as human beings, specifically, we're meant for our bodies. So after death, we're kind of in this state where we don't have our bodies, but we really like to have them. Well, that's not quite right, because we have God, as we talked about earlier on in this series. We have that fulfillment of all desire. So we don't long after our bodies, we don't pine after our bodies, because God fulfills that need for us in a certain way. But we're not really whole until we've got our bodies back. And that will happen at the end of time, as it has in the Christian beliefs. And a lot of phrases that you'll see in the book of Revelation, the graves opening and the dead rising from them. Well, at the resurrection of the dead, with the resurrection of the body, both those in heaven and those in hell will get their bodies back, because we're human beings. We're still human beings even after death. We don't turn into angels. We still keep our ties to our bodies. So we'll be given new and spiritual bodies, but they will be the completion of what is here. Here we suffer a lot of pain. There's a lot of things that go wrong with our bodies. It wasn't so in the beginning with Adam and Eve, but here we do suffer that because of the fall. At the resurrection of the dead, that aspect, at least for the just, will be rectified. So the spiritual bliss that we have in our souls will be reflected in our bodies, will be reflected in what is authentically a part of us. So when we see these connections, we have important points to even looking at Star Wars. Because luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. Well, in a sense, that's true, because the spiritual restoration of the body at the end of time, our matter might look a whole lot different than it is now, because it will be appropriate to the spiritual level of attaining God that we have. As we see with Jesus Christ himself, when he came back, when he had his resurrected body, he was able to get into rooms that were completely locked. He was able to appear in multiple places at the same time. So if we look at the resurrection of our body, if we look at luminous beings are we, and not this crude matter, not as a denial of the importance of the body, but looking for our bodies are not yet complete. Our bodies, even here, are a taste of what is to come. So we see the parallels between Jesus' bodily ascension to heaven and the bodily assumption, as it were, of Obi-Wan and Yoda into the Force, as we have said earlier, is God's grace poured out to us. So that attainment completely of God can be symbolized in the Force. So, this was episode 8 of Jesus and the Jedi. May the 4th be with you. And remember, his grace will be with you. Always.